In 1960, Overtown was one of the most densely populated and commercially active black neighborhoods in the American South. Its main commercial artery, Northwest 2nd Avenue, was known as Little Broadway. Its hotels and clubs hosted Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Count Basie, Billie Holiday, Cab Calloway, and Josephine Baker, performers who were permitted to play Miami Beach but barred, under Jim Crow law, from sleeping there, and who crossed the bay to find rooms and audiences in Overtown instead. The neighborhood had pharmacies and law offices and two-story stucco homes with front porches. It had churches, beauty salons, restaurants, and the kind of internal civic density that communities of long duration develop when they have been left alone long enough to build something real. By 1970, the population of Overtown had been cut nearly in half. The commercial district had lost a third of its businesses. Home ownership had collapsed. The neighborhood, which had housed roughly 40,000 residents at its peak, held fewer than 8,000 by the time the decade ended. The cause was not economic obsolescence, not population flight, not the abstract forces of urban change that cities sometimes invoke to explain the disappearance of communities that inconvenience their growth ambitions. The cause was concrete. Specifically, it was Interstate 95 and Interstate 395. City and state planners, using federal funds provided by the 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act, routed the new expressways directly through the center of Overtown. There was an alternative. Engineers had studied a route that would have carried the highways along an existing railroad corridor with minimal residential displacement. The white business community opposed it. That route, they argued, would limit the westward expansion of downtown. So the highways went through Overtown instead. 40 city blocks were demolished. 12,000 residents were displaced. Initial projections had estimated fewer than 6,000, a number later revised upward by historians who counted more carefully than the planners had. Very few of those displaced received meaningful relocation assistance. Most moved north to Liberty City and Opa-locka and other neighborhoods that bore the secondary consequences of their arrival. Overtown, the Harlem of the South, was buried under a highway interchange. For 60 years, that interchange sat above the neighborhood it had destroyed. The concrete was low-slung and utilitarian, the expressway engineering of an era that did not think much about what its infrastructure looked like from below, because the people living below it were not the intended audience. Overtown, over those 60 years, became one of the poorest communities in Miami-Dade County, characterized by vacant lots, abandoned buildings, and the permanent ambient roar of highway traffic overhead. The community had been used as a corridor, and the corridor had never been given back. This is the story into which, in 2017, the Florida Department of Transportation dropped an $802 million construction project. If you are watching this channel for the first time, we cover what happens when public money meets institutional ambition in structures that were supposed to serve the public. Subscribe. What follows is the full account of the I-395 Signature Bridge, a project that began as a highway reconstruction, became an icon-building exercise, and has spent the better part of a decade demonstrating that in South Florida, the distance between a ribbon-cutting rendering and an open road can be measured in hundreds of millions of dollars, and no one held clearly accountable. The project is formally called the I-395 SR-836 I-95 Design-Build Project. Its centerpiece is a bridge structure spanning 1,025 feet over Northeast 2nd Avenue and Biscayne Boulevard in downtown Miami, 6 sweeping arches that its builders have nicknamed the Fountain. The arches rise in a pattern that some observers have called elegant and others have called a high-tech tarantula, depending on disposition and the particular traffic jam in which they were sitting when they formed the opinion. The project had been under discussion in various forms for more than 30 years before construction began. FDOT held roughly 150 public presentations between 2004 and 2009 alone. The original highway infrastructure was aging, undersized, and dangerous. The I-95 and I-395 interchange was one of the most congested and accident-prone in South Florida, and the existing bridge over Biscayne Boulevard lacked the lanes and geometry to handle the traffic volumes the region's growth was generating. There was a legitimate engineering case for rebuilding it. What was less clear, and what has never been cleanly resolved in the public record was the case for the 6 arches. The design was created by Donald McDonald Architects and positioned from the outset not merely as a highway replacement, but as a civic landmark, a structure visible from the Port of Miami, an element that would redefine the downtown skyline, a bridge that would do for Miami what iconic bridges do for the cities fortunate enough to have them. FDOT described it as a signature architectural element. The builders called it the fountain. The press releases used the word iconic. The rendering showed something that looked, in the right light, like a harp or a crown, or a very large piece of public art placed astride one of the more congested interchanges in the southeast United States. The contract was awarded in 2017 to the Archer Western Des Moines joint venture, a partnership of Atlanta-based Archer Western Construction and Miami-based Des Moines Group, both experienced highway builders. The engineering design subcontractor for the signature bridge structure specifically was HDR Engineering, a Nebraska-based firm with an extensive portfolio of infrastructure projects. The guaranteed maximum price to FDOT was fixed as part of the design-build contract. The joint venture would be paid a lump sum to deliver the bridge, regardless of what it ultimately cost to build. Construction was set to be complete by 2021. The joint venture had committed to its price based on HDR's preliminary design drawings. Those drawings, according to lawsuits later filed by the joint venture, contained a fundamental error. HDR's senior engineer, the lawsuit alleged, had used the wrong code for wind calculations. The engineer had used the wrong gust factor and drag coefficient. He had, the lawsuit alleged, no expertise with wind calculations. The arches, as originally designed, would not have been able to withstand winds of up to 140 miles per hour, the category of hurricane the structure was required by Florida building standards to survive. In a state where the threat of hurricane force winds is not a contingency but a design requirement, a baseline assumption from which all structural planning begins. The signature element of an $802 million bridge had been designed by an engineer who, according to his own employer's legal adversaries in subsequent proceedings, lacked the relevant expertise and used the wrong numbers. HDR disputed the characterization. The company maintained that the drawings in question were conceptual and preliminary in nature, intended as a competitive design proposal rather than a final engineering document, and that wind load calculations would be completed during the formal design phase. The joint venture's position was that by the time HDR had disclosed the problem and completed the redesign, the lump sum price with FDOT had already been locked in. The contract, as the joint venture later put it in a federal filing, required that the engineer complete key design criteria, including wind loads, before the final price, with FDOT, was guaranteed. HDR had certified the design as viable. The joint venture had bid on that certification. The price was fixed. Then HDR changed the design. Redesign required widening the arch ribs to allow for installation of additional post-tensioning and reinforcing steel. By the time FDOT approved the changes in May 2019, 10 of the 18 months allocated for design activities in the project schedule had already elapsed. The joint venture had lost more than half its design window before a single arch had been built. According to the lawsuit, the cascading consequences of that lost time, additional design costs, construction costs, supervision costs, quality control, inspection, expert investigation, and attorney's fees amounted to $405 million in total damages. In 2022, the joint venture filed a lawsuit against HDR seeking to recover more than $155 million. In parallel, it filed a separate lawsuit against HDR's insurers, seeking to access coverage that the joint venture argued applied to the damages it had sustained. The lawsuit against HDR went to trial preparation in federal court in Miami over the next 2 years. In January 2025, the presiding judge issued a ruling that the joint venture had sought to avoid. HDR's conduct, the judge found, did not rise to the level of gross negligence. That ruling was consequential because it capped the amount the joint venture could immediately recover at $10 million. The limit of the insurance policy, HDR, was contractually required to obtain after legal defense costs had eroded the available coverage. A settlement was reached in 2024 in which HDR agreed to pay $12 million and the joint venture released $30 million in withheld fees. Neither party admitted liability. The engineering firm that the joint venture alleged had made a fundamental wind calculation error on a bridge in one of the most hurricane-prone cities in the United States walked away from the lawsuit having paid $12 million against claimed damages of more than $400 million. That gap between $12 million and $405 million was not absorbed by HDR. It was absorbed by the project. It is embedded in the cost overruns and schedule extensions that the public has been paying for, in traffic disruptions and lane closures and detours since construction began. There was also a separate mechanical problem. At the on-site concrete plant used for the project, a mechanical failure went undetected for approximately 3 months. During that period, the lawsuit alleged adulterated concrete was poured into critical structural elements. The repairs required were estimated at $3.6 million. The time required to identify the problem, stop the pours, and address the affected structures extended the schedule further. The Florida Department of Transportation, in its public communications about the project, attributed the delays to weather, supply chain disruptions, utility relocation complications, and a bid protest filed by a losing joint venture that set the start back by a year. These explanations were accurate as far as they went. They did not disclose the wind load miscalculation, the concrete contamination, the litigation, or the settlement until investigative reporters obtained court filings and published them in early 2026. For years, the people who paid tolls to cross Miami-Dade's expressways, whose money funded the project, were given weather and supply chains as the explanation for why a bridge that was supposed to open in 2021 still had no completion date they could rely on. In 2023, the projected completion date moved to 2027. In mid-2025, the Florida Department of Transportation quietly updated the project website to reflect a new completion date of 2029 and a new cost of $866 million, an increase of $64 million over the original contract price, not counting any costs the joint venture has absorbed or is still pursuing through litigation. The Florida Department of Transportation made no public announcement. The Miami New Times noted that the update happened silently, without press release or public notification. Journalists contacted the Florida Department of Transportation for comment. The department did not immediately respond. Transit Alliance. Miami, a transportation advocacy organization, described the project as a decade-long $840 million bottleneck. A county commissioner called it a mixed blessing, acknowledging its long-term value while expressing concern over the extended disruption to downtown. An independent engineer suggested forming a public panel to review the project and communicate its status transparently. That panel has not been formed. In 2026, a construction worker named Jorge Eliud Galindo Thompson fell 20 feet from an overpass on the project site onto Biscayne Boulevard and was pronounced dead at the scene. His death came months after a separate incident in which a toppled concrete beam sent 6 workers to the hospital. OSHA opened investigations into both incidents. The Department of Transportation issued condolences. The question of what the bridge is actually for has been answered differently by different parties over the course of its construction. The Florida Department of Transportation's own environmental impact statement for the project, prepared before construction began, identified the primary community benefit as savings in time and fuel provided by increased highway capacity. Those benefits, the environmental analysis noted, would primarily accrue to the people driving over the neighborhood, not the people living in it. For a project that had been justified, in part, as a step toward repairing the damage done to Overtown by the same highway in the 1960s, this was a revealing formulation. The highway would be rebuilt for the benefit of the commuters. The community that had been destroyed to make room for the original highway was receiving a different kind of benefit, a park underneath. The underdeck, officially renamed the Reverend Edward T. Graham Heritage Trail, is a 33-acre linear park planned for the space beneath the Interstate 395 viaducts, stretching from Northwest 3rd Avenue to Biscayne Bay. The city of Miami secured a $60 million federal grant through the Biden administration's Reconnecting Communities program, the largest federal grant in Miami's history, to fund the park's construction. The Trump administration rescinded that grant in 2025. The city said it remained committed to the project. No replacement funding has been identified. The concept of the park is genuine, and the intentions behind it deserve acknowledgement. A mile of open public space beneath a highway that once erased a neighborhood, honoring the civil rights leaders and the history of the community through ceramic panels and an amphitheater and urban gardens, this is not nothing. It is the kind of gesture that cities make when they have done something irreversible and wish to acknowledge it without undoing it. What it does not do is address what was done. The original choice to route Measham 395 through Overtown rather than along the railroad corridor, a choice made explicitly to protect downtown commercial expansion at the expense of a black residential neighborhood, displaced 12,000 people, destroyed 40 city blocks, and eliminated a community that had spent 2 generations building something durable in a city that offered black Miamians very little else. The descendants of those 12,000 people did not have the option of returning when the highway construction was complete. The land was gone. The institutions were gone. The commerce was gone. What replaced them was a concrete underpass that, for 60 years, served as both the cause and the memorial of the neighborhood's ruin. In 2012, the Congress for the New Urbanism placed Interstate 395 on its list of the top opportunities in North America to replace aging urban highways with street-level boulevards, an approach that has been used in other American cities to genuinely reconnect communities severed by mid-century highway construction, returning land to the street grid and allowing neighborhoods to heal across what had been uncrossable barriers. Miami did not take that option. Miami built a more elaborate version of what was already there at a cost that has now reached $866 million and rising, with completion projected for 2029 and a legal dispute over $400 million in claimed damages that resolved for $12 million on the eve of trial. The bridge will eventually open. The arches, when complete, will be visible from miles away. The 6-arch span over Biscayne Boulevard will appear in travel photography and tourism brochures and architectural reviews. The Florida Department of Transportation will hold a ceremony. Officials will speak about connectivity and investment and the transformation of downtown Miami. The Heritage Trail may eventually be built in whatever form the city can fund without the $60 million that was taken back. Overtown will remain what it has been since 1968, a neighborhood that was destroyed by a highway and offered, in return, a park beneath the highway that destroyed it. The $12 million settlement with the engineering firm, whose wind calculations were allegedly wrong, will not appear in any of the ceremony remarks. The $400 million gap between what was claimed and what was recovered will not be mentioned. The concrete that was adulterated for 3 months before anyone noticed will not come up. What will be said is that Miami now has an iconic bridge. What will not be said is what it cost to build, who paid for the decisions that made it cost that much, and what the community underneath it was offered instead.